It looks into the individual's past for explanations. The other is field theory, proposed by Dr. Kurt Lewin, which suggests the present moment contains all necessary causes. According to this view, the behavior can be explained by present conditions alone, without needing to examine the past. I believe both views hold some truth. I always emphasize that even chronic neuroses have their root cause in the present. A person sustains their neurosis every day by maintaining the wrong attitude, but that attitude often has historical roots. It formed long ago. So yes, history matters. But it's one-sided to see only the past. Psychological facts are not only caused, they are also goal-directed, they serve a purpose. This is what I mean by saying they are teleological. A wrong attitude may have been formed in childhood, but it wouldn't persist if it didn't serve some present purpose or wasn't sustained by current conditions. That's why a neurosis can vanish overnight under the right shock or change in environment. At the beginning of the war, I witnessed many cases where long-standing compulsions simply disappeared. Even schizophrenia can show vast improvement after a powerful shock. The whole system collapses when the underlying condition changes dramatically. In therapy, there is no rigid method. You treat the person as they are now. Whether or not you probe into their past depends on the case. Some people already know the entire history of their neurosis, yet it doesn't help them. For example, I once had a patient, a philosophy professor, who was convinced he had cancer. He brought dozens of X-rays that showed no trace of disease. He admitted he probably didn't have cancer, yet he feared he might. Despite all the evidence and his rational mind, he couldn't stop the thought. That's the issue. He knew it was nonsense, but he was compelled to believe it. Why? What is the force that makes a man believe something he consciously knows to be false? It's as if a demon possesses him, a power beyond his will, and that's where the real problem begins. He has no answer. I have no answer, so I tell him, now we must turn to the dream. The dream is the voice of the unconscious, the side of the psyche he knows nothing about. Many intellectuals are entirely unaware they even have an unconscious, but to make progress, they must come to terms with this unknown part of themselves. Now, one other principle I alluded to is the principle of entropy. The point is the standpoint of energetics as applied to psychic phenomena. In this field, you have no possibility to measure exactly, so it always remains a sort of analogy. Freud, for instance, used the term libido in the sense of sexual energy. That is not quite correct. If it is sexual, then it is a power like electricity or any other form of energy manifestation. Now, energy is a concept used to express the analogies of all manifestations of power. Namely, they have a certain quantity, a certain intensity, and there is a flow in one direction, to the ultimate suspension of the opposites. For instance, imagine a lake high on a mountain. It flows down until all the water is at the bottom, then it is finished. Something similar occurs in psychology. For example, we get tired from intellectual work or from consciously living, and we must sleep to restore our powers. It is just as if in the night the water is pumped back from the lower level to a higher level so that we can function again the next day. That simile limps too, of course. It is only an analogy. I use the term energy because I wanted to express that the manifestation of power is not limited to sexuality. We have other drives. The drive to conquer, to aggression, to create. Take animals, the way they build nests, or the urge that compels birds to migrate. These are energy manifestations. The meaning of sexuality would be entirely lost if everything were reduced to it. Freud himself later saw that his view was not applicable everywhere. He revised his theory by introducing the idea of ego drives. That is a different manifestation. So, in order not to prejudice things, I speak simply of energy, a quantity of energy that can manifest through sexuality or through any other instinct or drive. The essential point is not the existence of a single power, it is the diversity of expressions. Now, concerning motivation, or the conditions that arouse, direct, and sustain the individual, there seem to be two main views. One is historical. We look into the individual's development to find out why he is doing something now. The other is more immediate, as discussed by Dr. Kurt Lewin, who postulated a sort of field theory. He emphasized that all conditions affecting the individual in the present moment determine behavior, thus, one need not go back into the past. I maintain that even a chronic neurosis has its true cause in the present moment. A neurosis is made every day by the individual's wrong attitude, but that wrong attitude is an historical fact, and it needs to be understood as such. Still, that alone is not enough. Psychological facts are oriented not only to a cause, but also to a goal. They are teleological, they serve a purpose. The wrong attitude may have its origin in the past, but it is kept alive by immediate causes and present purposes. A neurosis can disappear in a day despite all its past causes. At the beginning of the war, there were cases of compulsive neuroses lasting for years that suddenly vanished, because the person entered an entirely new condition. It was like a shock. Even schizophrenia can sometimes vastly improve through a powerful shock. Such a shock alters the habitual attitude, and the whole pathological system collapses. So, in therapy, one does not need to reformulate the entire past life in order to treat the neurosis. You deal with the patient as he is now. There is no strict system in therapy. Some patients know as much about their neurosis as I do. In such cases, we can start right away with the problem. For example, I recall a professor of philosophy who was convinced he had cancer. He showed me dozens of X-rays proving he had no cancer. He said, "I know there is no cancer, but I am afraid I might have one." He had consulted many surgeons, and all had confirmed there was nothing, but, he said, "I might have one." That was enough. A case like this can stop from one moment to the next. He simply stops thinking such a foolish thing, but that is exactly what he cannot do. So I said to him, "You know it is nonsense. Why are you forced to believe it? What power makes you think such a thing against your will? It is like a possession, like a demon inside you. What is this power? That is the problem for an intellectual man." And I said, "You have no answer, and I have no answer. Now what are we going to do?" Then we must look at the dreams, because the dream is the manifestation of the unconscious side. He had never heard of the unconscious, so I had to explain that he had one, and that the dream was its expression. If we succeed in analyzing the dream, we might get an idea about the power that compels him. In such cases, one can begin immediately with the analysis of dreams, and in serious cases, mind you, this is not a simple case, despite the apparent simplicity of the symptom, the same approach applies. After the preliminaries, the family history, the medical anamnesis, we come to the question, what is it in your unconscious that makes you wrong? What hinders you from thinking normally? That is where we begin the observation of the unconscious. Day by day, we proceed based on the data the unconscious produces. We discuss the dream. It provides a new surface to the problem. Then, patient has another dream which gives another answer, because the unconscious stands in a compensatory relation to consciousness. Eventually, we get the full picture, and if he sees the full picture and has the necessary moral stamina, then he can be cured. In the end, it is a moral question whether a man applies what he has learned or not. Now, what is found in a dream is not necessarily a memory or image of what happened in the past. It is a symbol, a special term. It is the manifestation of the unconscious situation as seen from the unconscious. For example, I sometimes ask myself, "Are you really quite convinced of this?" And I must admit, there are doubts, not in the moment when I tell you, but in the unconscious. Then I have a dream, and those doubts emerge in the dream. That is how the unconscious views the situation. It is as though the unconscious says, "Yes, I see what you are asserting, but you entirely omit such and such a point." The unconscious is not merely the result of repression, as in the Freudian view. It may be that what the unconscious presents is so disagreeable that one prefers not to listen. Many people would be far less neurotic if they could admit these things. But such things are difficult, unpleasant, or inconvenient. There is always a certain amount of repression, but that is not the main issue. The main issue is that these contents are truly unconscious. If you are unconscious of things that ought to be conscious, then you are dissociated. A man whose left hand never knows what the right is doing. Such a man is hampered in everything.
Now, whether there is equivalence between the unconscious of individuals from different cultures is a complicated question. When we speak of the unconscious, we must ask, which unconscious? There is the personal unconscious, which is specific to the individual. In treatment, one first deals with this personal unconscious. Only later do dreams appear that show contact with the collective unconscious. As long as the material is of a personal nature, one deals with the personal unconscious. But when the problem becomes greater than the personal, when it is collective, you get collective dreams. The personal unconscious deals with the individual's immediate life, their relation to father, mother, spouse, all sorts of variations, but suppose the conflict deepens, threatens the mind itself, then the patient may have a collective dream where mythological motifs appear. I wrote a book, The Psychology of the Unconscious, with such examples. I remember a very learned and rational man. He had many personal problems and developed a strained relationship with everyone around him. He got into a brawl with members of a society he belonged to. It was shocking. Suddenly, he began to have collective dreams, images he had never encountered consciously, mythological motifs. He thought he was going mad. It was as if the whole world had transformed. Now, that is what you may see in schizophrenia, but this was not schizophrenia. It was the collective unconscious breaking through. To make things clear, I should tell a story, a long one. Short examples often fail to capture the essence. I once spoke of a young intuitive woman who suddenly claimed she had a black snake in her belly. That is not an individual fantasy. That is a collective symbol, a shared fantasy that has appeared in many cultures, though it may be completely unknown to her or anyone in her environment. It's a well-known symbol in India, where it forms the basis of a whole philosophical system called Tantrism. It's the Kundalini serpent. This woman had no connection to India, but the image appeared spontaneously. I even wondered at first if she might be insane, but she was simply highly intuitive. The Kundalini is known only to a few specialists in the West, and yet there it was, rising from her unconscious. This is a clear example of a collective unconscious at work. Now, in daily life, individuals may repress what troubles them, but we must be clear, repression isn't always a conscious act. Often, things simply don't appear in consciousness. Freud would call it repression, but many of these contents were never conscious to begin with. Later, when they surface, we say, "Ah, that's why it stayed hidden. It was incompatible with the person's conscious attitude." But that's hindsight. You couldn't predict it in advance. These emotionally charged elements can be autonomous. They can emerge or disappear on their own, not by the will of the person. The same goes for projections. People say one makes a projection, but that's nonsense. You don't create a projection. It is there. You simply discover it. You see in others what you are unconscious of in yourself. The beam in your own eye becomes the splinter you perceive in your brother's. So-called repressions and projections are not deliberate. They happen. They're expressions of unconscious contents acting autonomously. That was my initial disagreement with Freud. In my word association experiments, I found that some complexes weren't repressed. They just didn't appear at all. The unconscious, you see, is real. It's an entity with its own autonomy. It functions independently, like a second psychic system within us. Freud and other orthodox analysts speak of defense mechanisms, projections, rationalizations, as tools of the ego. But in many cases, these are not mechanisms we consciously deploy. They are expressions of unconscious patterns. That black serpent from the girl's fantasy, it had never been repressed. It was completely unconscious and emerged spontaneously. Now the Freudians might say it was a phallic symbol, but you can interpret anything as a phallic symbol if you wish, a church spire, a tower. But when a person dreams of a penis, what is that?
One analyst once told me in this case the sensor did not function. Is that a scientific explanation? I think not. Now, turning to the process of individuation, that is quite simple in essence. Consider the acorn. Plant it in the ground and it grows into an oak. That is the law within the seed. So it is with man. He develops from an egg into a whole human being. The pattern of growth is inherent. Once I had discussions with Einstein, though I would not call myself his friend. I was more of a host. He was deeply absorbed in his mathematical work, which made it difficult to share my psychological ideas. This was at the beginning of his theory of relativity, a fascinating time. Later, I found much value in Professor Toynbee's historical ideas. He recognized that civilizations are governed by archetypal forms. That insight resonated with my own thoughts on the historical role of archetypes. These forms shape human behavior across centuries. Symbols matter deeply. Take, for instance, the red star of Soviet Russia and the white star of America. Both five-pointed, yet in ancient alchemy, red and white were seen as opposites destined for union. The red slave and the white woman. Russia is a patriarchy, America a matriarchy. These symbols express the eternal archetypal dance between masculine and feminine, between opposing principles. Another key symbol is the mandala. It appears in many cultures and eras, an ancient archetype. Alchemists called it quadratura circuli, the square within the circle. It symbolizes totality, the self, not the ego. The ego is only a part. The mandala expresses the center of the whole personality. When a person's psyche is in disorder, the mandala may emerge spontaneously, in dreams, drawings, or visions. It appears as a compensatory symbol, revealing the possibility of inner order. It is a healing image, and its center is not the ego but the self. The self is the greater totality within us. This symbol was once central in the Middle Ages, but came to be seen merely as decorative. In truth, it's an autonomous, powerful image of wholeness. In the East, it still plays an essential role. It reminds us that there is a center within, an ordering principle. Now, when I was a young alienist, unsure how to begin with patients, I used the word association test. It gave me access to their unconscious. Through it, I learned what they wouldn't or couldn't tell me, and even what they themselves did not know. The word complex became central. I coined the term Gefühlsbetonter complex, an emotionally toned complex. These complexes are the roots of neuroses and other psychic disturbances. At first, I found only personal complexes. The idea of a collective unconscious came later, slowly, as I began to notice mythological or archetypal patterns emerging. Tests, like the Rorschach or my association method, are helpful, especially for teaching students. They show, in a measurable way, how the unconscious operates. Repressions, hesitations, emotional blocks, they become visible. Even bodily reactions can reveal complexes. We measured breathing patterns, galvanic skin responses. In fact, through these methods, I once uncovered a murder. It's similar to your lie detector in America. We showed that a complex could influence breathing so deeply that people stopped ventilating parts of their lungs, leading to conditions like tuberculosis. I came to believe that half of such cases are psychologically rooted. This leads into psychosomatic medicine, where the psyche affects the body. I have seen astonishing recoveries from chronic illness when a patient becomes conscious of their complexes, not through mere breathing exercises, but by understanding their psychic conflicts. So you see, emotional life, unconscious contents, dreams, projections, the symbols that arise, these are not illusions. They are realities, real forces, patterns, and images that shape our minds, our bodies, and our history. The unconscious is not just a storehouse of forgotten memories. It is a living reality, a second half of the soul. On the Psyche is Depths and the Archetypes of Illness, my dear seeker of the soul's mysteries, let us delve into the enigma of the psyche, where the unseen stirs the visible, and the unconscious weaves its threads into the fabric of our bodily existence. For decades, I have observed that the ailments of the body are often but shadows cast by the psyche's unrest. Physicians, those who call alienists in distant lands, have noted that 60 or 70% of their patients suffer not from physical maladies, but from disturbances born of the mind, psychosomatic, as they term it. This is no new revelation. For over half a century, we have known that the psyche can shape the body's fate, amplifying existing frailties or conjuring symptoms where no organic flaw resides. Consider tuberculosis, ulcers of the stomach, chronic arthritis, or even skin diseases. Each, under certain conditions, bears the mark of the psyche's influence. Some now whisper of cancer itself as touched by psychosomatic forces, and this does not surprise me. 50 years ago, I encountered cases where the timing of an ailment seemed too precise, too convenient, as if the unconscious had orchestrated its arrival to speak what the conscious mind refused to hear. You might ask why a soul selects such suffering, but this is a misunderstanding of the psyche's nature. The crocodile does not choose you, it seizes you. So too does illness emerge from the unconscious, not as a choice, but as an eruption of forces beyond the ego's control. The psyche does not select its symptoms, they happen to it, rising from the depths where personal and collective forces collide. To seek a reason in the individual's personality alone is to exaggerate the ego's power, as if it could dictate the tides of the unconscious. Yet every disease carries a psychological accompaniment, and the manner of its treatment, whether we attend to the soul's whispers, can determine a life's course. Even an infectious disease such as angina, though rooted in physical causes, may find its moment in a psychological crisis. The psyche, weakened by inner turmoil, becomes a fertile ground for affliction. While no amount of analysis can dissolve a fevered abscess, a proper psychological attitude may fortify the soul against such invasion. This understanding of psychosomatic interplay is no novelty to me. It is a truth long recognized in these lands. Yet I confess a certain bemusement at the modern fervor for rediscovering what we knew half a century ago. In technological matters, your distant shores may lead, but in the realm of the psyche you lag behind, unaware of the vast terrain beneath consciousness. Forgive my candor, but the study of the human soul demands more than biological measures. It requires an exploration of man in his social, historical, and mythic contexts. The psyche is no mere appendage of the body. It is shaped by the collective, by the traditions and histories that precede us. To understand it, we must look beyond the individual to the archetypes that dwell in the collective unconscious, those primordial patterns that govern our dreams, our fears, our very being. When I began my work with association experiments, I glimpsed the unconscious not as a repository of discarded thoughts, but as a living force, a matrix capable of autonomous action. It is not merely the remnants of consciousness, as some would claim, but a creative wellspring, teeming with motifs that transcend personal experience. In the delusions of the schizophrenic or the dreams of the ordinary soul, I found images that could not have been acquired in our immediate surroundings, symbols of gods, heroes, and ancient rites, as if the psyche carried the memory of humanity's dawn. The child is not born a tabula rasa, a blank slate, but a vessel of ancestral patterns, encoded in the genes not merely as biological impulses, but as psychic arrangeurs, shaping behavior and character. These innate factors interact with the environment, social conditions, laws, traditions, forming a complex interplay that defines the individual. To ignore this is to sever man from his roots, to reduce him to a statistical average, stripped of his unique essence. The psyche's history is the history of the human race, a tapestry woven through eons. My first book, The Psychology of the Unconscious, sought to illuminate this, drawing from the fantasies of a young woman recorded by my colleague Flournoy. Her visions, poetic and mythic, were not personal inventions but eruptions of the collective unconscious, rich with historical and mythological motifs. These were not understood by her or her observer, yet they revealed a truth. The unconscious is a living remnant of humanity's story, a matrix that produces not mere memories but autonomous acts, intrusions into consciousness that defy the ego's reign. This realization cost me dearly, for it set me at odds with those who saw the unconscious as a mere storehouse of repressed desires. To me, it was a creative force capable of shaping destiny. In 1918, I wrote of the relations between the ego and the unconscious, exploring how this hidden realm interferes with consciousness, not as a passive relic, but as an active counteractor. The unconscious is no mere shadow. It is a partner in the psyche's dance, capable of disrupting the ego's illusions of mastery. To treat a patient is to reckon with this force, to dialogue with its intrusions, voices, delusions, dreams, that carry meaning beyond the personal. In the fantasies of the schizophrenic, I found not chaos but a hidden order, a system of archetypes that spoke of humanity's collective past. Unlike the hysteric, whose unconscious contents are humanly comprehensible, the schizophrenic's visions are chaotic, fragmented, yet rich with mythic significance. They are not mere madness, but messages from the depths, demanding elucidation. Over 50 years ago, I set out to understand these eruptions, driven not by hope of cure, but by scientific curiosity. In cases of hysteria or somnambulism, the unconscious spoke clearly, revealing a second personality, dramatic, suggestive, human. In schizophrenia, the visions were stranger, less systematic, yet no less meaningful. To explore this, I turned to a case recorded by Flournoy, a series of fantasies from an American girl, untouched by my influence. These visions, half poetic, half romantic, were a treasure trove of mythological material, evidence of an unconscious that was not personal but historical. This became the foundation of my book, now called Symbols of Transformation, where I sought to map the functioning of the unconscious as a creative, autonomous force. This work marked a turning point, for it revealed the psyche as a living archive of human experience, a matrix of archetypes that shape our lives beyond our knowing. The archetypes are not mere ideas but instinctual images, dynamic forces that produce myths within the psyche. Mythology itself is the pronouncement of these inner processes, a necessity for man's wholeness. To live without myth is to live incomplete, reduced to a statistical shadow. Natural science, with its love of averages, strips away the individual's unique value, depriving him of the creative background that defines his soul. The humanities, those neglected guardians of our past, are essential to understanding man, for they connect us to the myths, traditions, and histories in which we are rooted. To be born without this connection is a mutilation, a disease of the soul. I recall a young woman, raised in a worldly manner, cut off from her heritage. Her grandfather, a Tzaddik in Galicia, lived in the myth, yet she was adrift, plagued by phobias and anxiety. No prior treatment had eased her suffering, for she was severed from her past. When I told her, "Your fear is the fear of Yahweh," it pierced her like lightning. Within a week, her symptoms faded, for she had glimpsed the archetype she had lost, a connection to the divine, to the mythic ground of her being. To live as a mere number, as modern society often demands, is to destroy the soul's vitality. The individual, not the average, is the carrier of life. This led me to the study of archetypes, those numinous patterns that give life meaning. They are not mere intellectual constructs but living forces capable of transforming the soul. In a patient, I once saw the archetype of the divine projected onto me, as if I were a father, a god, holding her in the arms of a wheat-field deity swaying with the wind. This was no personal bond but a numinous experience, a revelation of the archetype she lacked. Such moments liberate, for they grant an incorruptible value, freeing the soul from dependency on external desires or ambitions. The archetypes are the foundation of mythology, religion, and poetry, expressing the biological and psychic truth of man. To ignore them is to live half, blind, disconnected from the past that shapes us. Yet modern man, enamored of rationality, dismisses these truths as mysticism, failing to see the psyche's depth. My work has sought to bridge this gap, to trace the unconscious through history, from the Gnostics, who first grappled with archetypes, to the alchemists, whose Hermetic philosophy mirrored the psyche's transformations. Alchemy, misnamed as mere chemistry, is a spiritual movement, a record of the psyche's dialogue with the collective unconscious. For 1700 years, its text, Latin, Greek, often unpublished, mapped the archetype's evolution, showing how consciousness has shifted while the unconscious remains eternal. This is no abstract study. It is vital to understanding phenomena like the psychic epidemics that have shaped our age. The horrors of war, the mass movements of our time, are not mere politics but expressions of the unconscious, unleashed when man ignores his mythic root. To understand the psyche is to see its history, to recognize the archetypes that move us. They are not relics but living forces, shaping our dreams, our illnesses, our destinies. To live fully is to embrace this truth, to integrate the conscious and unconscious, to become not a number but an individual, whole and rooted in the eternal.